For centuries, the ruins gave almost nothing away. Beneath the plains of modern Pakistan and northwestern India lay streets, wells, workshops, drains, houses, seals, and entire neighborhoods belonging to cities that had once been among the largest on Earth. Yet the people who built them left behind no readable history. Their writing remains undeciphered. Their rulers are unknown. And sometime after their cities reached their greatest height, the urban world they had created began to unravel, not with one final battle, not with a single destroyed capital, but city by city, settlement by settlement, until one of the ancient world's greatest civilizations was transformed almost beyond recognition. The mystery becomes stranger when we look at what disappeared. At Mohenjo-Daro, archaeologists uncovered a planned city of brick streets and carefully organized neighborhoods. At Harappa, standardized weights, seals, craft workshops, and evidence of long-distance exchange revealed a society connected by systems extending across an enormous territory. Farther south, Dolavira contained reservoirs, gateways, residential districts, workshop areas, and an extraordinary system for collecting and managing water. Between roughly 2600 and 1900 BCE, this network formed what archaeologists call the mature Harappan phase of the Indus civilization. Its settlements stretched across parts of present-day Pakistan and India. Farmers produced food on river plains. Craftspeople shaped stone beads, pottery, shell, copper, and other materials. Merchants used standardized weights. Small carved seals carried images of animals and lines of mysterious symbols. Some of those seals traveled far beyond the Indus world, turning up in places such as Mesopotamia and Oman. This was not an isolated civilization. It was connected to a Bronze Age world of ships, ports, traders, metals, stones, textiles, agricultural goods, and distant markets. And yet, compared with Egypt or Mesopotamia, something is conspicuously missing. No securely identified royal palace dominates Mohenjo-Daro. No enormous royal tomb has revealed the face of an Indus king. No surviving inscription tells us the name of a conqueror who unified the region. Political authority certainly existed, but its exact form remains debated. The most visible evidence of coordination is found instead in the cities themselves. Standardized bricks, weights, planned spaces, water systems, and material traditions shared across enormous distances. Then, around the beginning of the second millennium BCE, that pattern started changing. Large urban centers lost population, long-distance systems became less uniform, some characteristic features of mature Harappan life declined or disappeared, settlements shifted, the great cities were no longer functioning as they once had. For generations, archaeologists searched for the event that could explain it, and one early explanation seemed horrifyingly simple. In the 20th century, some researchers connected human remains discovered at Mohenjo-Daro with the idea of a violent invasion. The decline of the Indus cities became entangled with theories that incoming groups had destroyed the civilization. It was a dramatic story, but archaeology did not support such a simple ending. There is no convincing evidence for one massive invasion that simultaneously destroyed the major Indus cities. And when researchers began examining the broader settlement pattern, the mystery changed. They were no longer asking, who destroyed the Indus civilization? They were asking something much harder. What happens when the environment supporting an enormous urban system slowly changes? The Indus world had always depended heavily on water. That sounds obvious, but the landscape these communities occupied was unusually complicated. The civilization spread across regions influenced by major rivers, seasonal waterways, monsoon rainfall, floods, and shifting river channels. For farmers, the timing and reliability of water could determine everything: a successful harvest, a failed harvest, whether a village could remain where it was, or whether families eventually had to move. Researchers studying ancient river landscapes found that some older assumptions were wrong. One influential idea imagined a powerful Himalayan river flowing through the Ghaggar-Hakra region during the height of Indus urbanism. But geological research showed that a major former course of the Sutlej had shifted away thousands of years before the mature Harappan cities appeared. The Indus settlements in that region therefore developed beside an abandoned river valley rather than beside the enormous Himalayan river some had imagined. That discovery solved one problem and created another. If these people had successfully occupied landscapes without depending on a giant permanent Himalayan river, then river change alone could not explain their disappearance. Researchers turned to the monsoon. Evidence preserved in caves, sediments, lakes, archaeological remains, and other climate records suggests that rainfall across parts of South Asia weakened during the period in which Indus urban life was changing. The transformation was not necessarily one single catastrophic drought. Instead, the evidence increasingly points toward repeated episodes of reduced rainfall and growing hydroclimatic instability that would have placed long-term pressure on agricultural communities. A study from 2025 pushed that story even further. Researchers reconstructed ancient river discharge and compared it with the archaeological timeline of the Indus civilization. The results suggested that prolonged drought conditions repeatedly affected river systems during the centuries surrounding the urban decline. Rather than imagining one apocalyptic year when the rain stopped, the evidence suggests something more difficult for a civilization to survive: repeated stress. One bad period could be endured. A second could force adaptation, but generations of unreliable water could gradually change where people lived, what they grew, and which cities remained practical to support. And archaeology suggests that the Harappans did adapt. This may be the most important clue of all. The civilization did not simply disappear, its people changed their strategy. As environmental conditions became less predictable, populations appear to have shifted away from some major urban centers towards smaller communities, including settlements farther east. Agricultural practices also became more flexible. Research has identified evidence for diversified cropping strategies capable of reducing dependence on a single rainfall pattern. This was not the behavior of a population simply waiting for catastrophe. It was the behavior of communities responding to a changing world. Imagine what that transformation may have looked like. A family living near one of the great cities would not wake one morning and announce that their civilization had collapsed. The wells might still hold water, markets might still operate, potters might still fire vessels, farmers might still bring grain into town. But perhaps trade was becoming less reliable. Perhaps harvests were becoming harder to predict. Perhaps relatives had already moved toward another settlement. Perhaps maintaining enormous urban systems no longer offered the advantages it once had. One household leaves, then another, workshops produce less, trade networks weaken, public infrastructure receives less attention. The city remains standing, but the system that made it a city begins to disappear. That is why archaeologists increasingly describe what followed around 1900 BCE not simply as a collapse, but as a period of deurbanization and regional transformation. The enormous interconnected urban network fractured into more localized cultures. Some traditions continued, others changed, and some of the clearest symbols of the earlier civilization faded away. The writing system is one of them. Thousands of Indus inscriptions survive on seals, tablets, pottery, and other objects. Many contain only a handful of signs. None has yet produced the breakthrough archaeologists desperately want: a long bilingual inscription comparable to the Rosetta Stone. Without that key, We cannot read the civilization's own account of what happened. We do not know what they called Mohenjo-Daro. We do not know what titles their leaders used. We do not even know with certainty what language or languages the script represented. The civilization's final generations remain archaeologically visible, but historically silent. And that silence once made the disappearance of the Indus cities seem almost total. Modern genetic research tells a different story. Ancient DNA studies of later South and Central Asian populations show that ancestry related to people associated with the Indus world contributed substantially to later populations of South Asia. The cities declined. The people did not simply vanish. Their descendants lived on. Their communities moved. Their farming systems changed. Regional cultures developed. And the civilization that appears to disappear from the archaeological record may instead represent something more complicated. One form of society dissolving while its population reorganized into new ones. That changes the entire mystery, because perhaps the wrong question was always, what destroyed the Indus civilization? The evidence suggests there may never have been one destroyer, not an invading army, not one earthquake, not one river changing course, not one drought. Instead, weakening monsoons, recurring water stress, shifting settlement patterns, changing agricultural strategies, alterations in trade, and the growing difficulty of sustaining large urban centers may have interacted over centuries. Researchers still debate the weight of each factor, and different parts of the enormous Indus world almost certainly experience the transformation differently. Today, the streets of Mohenjo-Daro remain beneath the open sky. Dholavira's reservoirs still cut across an arid landscape. Harappan seals still preserve symbols no one can confidently read. The cities survived in brick and stone long after the political and economic systems behind them disappeared. And perhaps that is what makes the Indus story so unsettling. Civilizations do not always end with burning palaces and invading armies. Sometimes the rivers change, the rains weaken, trade contracts, people adapt, families move, and eventually, the city that once seemed permanent becomes a ruin. The Indus civilization was not simply erased, its urban world was transformed, while the people who created it continued into the societies that came afterward. And until their script is finally understood, one final voice remains missing from the investigation, their own. If one of the largest civilizations of the ancient world could transform so completely that we still cannot read its story, how many other chapters of the human past are waiting for archaeology to recover? Subscribe to Void Millennia for more hidden history, ancient mysteries, and discoveries buried beneath the past.